It was sunset, the Saturday just before Halloween, when at the age of 6 years old, I went to spend the weekend with my Aunt Evelyn. Now before that, I'd mostly seen Aunt Evelyn at Christmas, a red-haired woman who laughed a lot, and as we opened presents, she stuck the plastic gift wrapping bows to the top of her head until the collection resembled some kind of avant-garde hat. I'd sat in her lap and she pretended like her legs were the agitator in a washing machine and I was a pile of clothes. "Get ready for the spin cycle, Sugar Pop," she'd shout. In short, Aunt Evelyn was fun. So there I was, my suitcase packed for a week with her in the crooked little house nestled between the bases of converging hills deep in rural Indiana. The rain had just begun when my parents dropped me off that evening, and I could hear the rumble of thunder in the distance. On the front porch, there was a lit jack-o'-lantern with a lopsided grin that looked a lot like my Aunt Evelyn's own smile. "A self-portrait," she said, appearing from the shadows of the creeper vines that covered the porch railing. And then she cackled like a friendly witch. Aunt Evelyn's house had everything. An endless supply of sugar-laden breakfast cereals, which she cheerfully fed me for dinner, along with Pop-Tarts and cookies. Pictures of Elvis and Jesus painted on black velvet that glowed when lit with the attached black lights. Towering stacks of old china plates purchased at garage sales and shoved into every corner, and which she encouraged me to use as frisbees. A collection of scratched record albums included one called The World's Greatest Marches. And wearing robes and carrying large wooden spoons, Aunt Evelyn and I marched around her overstuffed living room, playing musical chairs with the dozens, and I mean dozens, of mismatched chairs that filled that little house. After we'd finally fallen breathless onto the squeaky sofa, I asked her why she had so many things. "Because, Sugar Pop," she said, leaning in and looking deep into my eyes, "you never know when doomsday is coming." Now this should have been my first clue, but I was only 6. By the time I went to bed, the rain was pouring and thunder and lightning crashed and crackled across the night sky. But it was far past my bedtime and I was too tired to care. It was just a few hours later when Aunt Evelyn woke me. "Get up," she said, shaking me and rattling those stacks of china cups and plates that littered the floor. "Get up, it's the end of the world." She took me to the window, and there, by the light of the moon against the Halloween black sky, she pointed to the bottom of the rain-slicked hills that surrounded us. "See," she said, "the water is getting higher and higher and we'll be washed away before you know it." Now, other than the expected puddles, I couldn't see anything threatening. "We're doomed, Sugar Pop," she said, her voice hopeless and her eyes now full of tears. I tried to comfort her as best I could, but nothing I said seemed to get through. Over and over, she kept saying, "I knew this day would come." And so for my Aunt Evelyn that night, and for all the people out there who can't see a break in the storm clouds, let us light a candle to help them find their way through the dark. It's not always easy to light that candle. All through that night, my aunt kept repeating, "I knew this day would come." What struck me then was that underneath my aunt's usually joyful exterior, she had clearly been waiting with certainty for something bad, something devastating. It's really no surprise that it would be a big flood that would be one of Aunt Evelyn's greatest fears. After all, the flood myth is one found in many cultures, whether it's Noah's Ark, Panu, or Gilgamesh. For ancient people, these kind of stories were a way of understanding one of life's great mysteries. Common to these stories is the theme that a great flood is sent by a deity or deities as an act of divine retribution. My Aunt Evelyn believed that night that the wrath of God was surely coming down to punish us all. When I think of all the joy that she had naturally bubbling out of her, I mourn the loss of that spiritual energy wasted on waiting for the flood. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we generally think of ourselves as above or beyond that kind of preoccupation. Our Universalist tradition says that if God exists, it is an unconditionally loving God, and scientific rationality guides our understanding of a rainstorm. Yet we are still surrounded by mystery. We don't know why some bad things happen, and we have no certainties to answer all the big questions of why we're here, what it all means. So it's understandable that sometimes a little bit of my Aunt Evelyn, just a little bit, can live in all of us. The flood story is found in multiple cultures because there is something primal in it, something we respond to surrounding the possibility of our own destruction in much the same way people flock to see disaster films. How often do we find ourselves waiting for something awful to happen? How often do we get preoccupied with looking at the worst case scenario of a situation? What I'm talking about, and again, how appropriate right now before Halloween, is fear. The fear of something awful lurking just around the corner, just waiting to pounce on us. We can live our lives in dread and not even have a clue what exactly we're dreading. But disasters do happen, there's no doubt. People experience job losses, financial troubles, chronic illness, accidents, and so on. And I do know that some of you are experiencing some of these things right now. Sometimes there's a lot that we can do to make things better. And sometimes there's very little. For true, unmanageable catastrophe does happen, like when incurable illness strikes, or hurricanes hit towns, or tsunamis strike, like that one that hit Japan a couple of years ago. Speaking of that tsunami, I'd like to tell you the story of Masahiro Kazumatsu. Now, at the time of the tsunami in Japan, Kazumatsu is 76 years old. He watches, horrified, on the television as during his daughter's normal shift, the tsunami engulfs the airport she works in, leaving it completely, and I mean completely, underwater. Located many miles from there, he calls and calls his daughter's cell phone, but there's no answer. She must be dead, all his friends tell him, but Kazumatsu won't believe it. So despite being warned that he will never be able to reach the airport his daughter worked in, he overcomes his fear, gets in his car for what should have been a half-day's journey, but on which he ends up seeing 5 sunrises and 5 sunsets. The roads are almost impassable, and he has to dodge horrors at every turn. And finally, his car gets stuck in the mud, but it's almost out of fuel, and there's no gas to refill it anyway, so Kazumatsu begins to walk. I know that my daughter may be just one more person among so many dead, he says, but my deepest hope is that she is alive. That is my prayer at this moment. And so on, Kazumatsu walks on through the water and the debris and the mud. Now, in honor of Kazumatsu's courageous journey through the unknown and all the others who have continued journeying through life's mysteries even when things seem bleak, let us light another candle to help them know they do not make that journey alone. Finally, on weary legs, Kazumatsu reaches the devastated airport where his daughter worked. There he is directed to an emergency center where there are crowds of frightened, disoriented people. Face after face is unfamiliar, but he can't bring himself to stop searching. And suddenly, there she is, his daughter. She's in shock, she's hungry, she's scared, but she's alive, and she's ready to travel with her father back to their home. Despite his fear, for Kazumatsu, there was also something within him that said it was worth trying. It was worth going through the flood to seek his daughter. Now compare that to my Aunt Evelyn the night of that big storm, when her fear left her immobilized with just a 6-year-old child doing his best to comfort her. I have a lot of compassion. I have a lot of compassion for my Aunt Evelyn, for I know it's much easier to give into the fear that's all around us, to have dread for what life may bring us. I know that's easier than working to overcome potential problems, and that can sometimes seem futile and even hopeless. But that kind of thinking is anti-Unitarian Universalist, because I contend that we are, at our hearts, optimists. Now let's face it, I'm going to get this out of the way right up front. Optimism is kind of a dirty word nowadays. After all, the old saying goes, don't be too optimistic, that light at the end of the tunnel may be another train. Or how about, how many optimists does it take to screw in a light bulb? Anybody know? None. They sit around being convinced that the power will come back on soon. And when you find yourself in the middle of your own personal storm, how annoying it is to have someone come up to you and say, oh, just look on the sunny side. No, that's one kind of optimist. People always looking for the silver lining, but blind to the practical realities. And that's just the kind of optimist that we Unitarian Universalists are not. We are realistic or practical optimists in keeping with the notion that we look toward the best in humanity, but we don't ignore criticisms, rationality, or challenges. In this way, our choice to be optimists, practical optimists, becomes all the more powerful because it's not done with our heads buried in the sand. We know, too, that studies have shown that optimists are happier, are more successful, and live longer than pessimists. More than that, though, Unitarian Universalists find hope and strength to carry on because we believe the world is capable of changing for the better. This was never more clear to me than when I worked as a chaplain at St. Joseph Hospital last year. One of my peers, John, was also working as a chaplain at the time. He was polite enough to me, but I got the sense that he was studying me from a distance, listening to my every word in our group sessions as I recounted the conversations I'd had with ill patients as they tried to make meaning of their lives and situations. I'm sure as a UU, you might have had that experience of being studied by someone who wasn't a UU. Finally, one day, John cornered me. "Where do you find hope?" he demanded. No hi, how are you? Nice to see you. Just a rather accusatory, "Where do you find hope?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "If you're not telling your patients about an afterlife," he said, "then how do you offer them a reason to carry on?" I shrugged. "We talk about the good things that are found right here." "Here?" John asked. "You mean like here? Now?" "Yeah," I said, and he looked shocked and not convinced. "I don't know how you do it," he said finally. "You Unitarian Universalists seem at peace with all this misery and sadness, but I don't get it. If I didn't have the afterlife to look forward to, I don't know how I'd go on. And so for John and all the others out there who have trouble finding reasons to carry on in the uncertainties of this world, let's light a candle to help them see the good that surrounds us even when things are rough. That conversation with John brought home to me the difference between his belief system and ours. As far as he was concerned, this world was an unredeemable place. Now to me, that's a very pessimistic view. As a Unitarian Universalist, I subscribe to the words of William King. Believe that life is worth living, and our belief will help create that fact. We have optimism built into our faith, for we believe we can affect change. And history has proven us correct again and again. Whether it was Susan B. Anthony fighting for women's rights, or Thomas Starr King's work right here in California. It's not just those big names, of course. It's all the people who've worked for justice over the years, whether it was marching for racial or marriage equality. Our successes aren't often immediate, but we've learned to see small victories as precursors of larger change. And that I contend makes us optimists. Not foolish optimists, but realistic, practical optimists. James Luther Adams was a profoundly influential 20th century Unitarian Universalist. And he said that the resources, divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. Now, in other words, we cultivate joy and gratitude in preparation for the storms that come. Then, using our creativity and what some might call our God-given talents, we provide support and aid to those in need, like Kazumatsu walking all those miles in the mud to look for the daughter that everyone else said was dead. Now, all this optimism talk doesn't mean we don't sometimes gripe and grumble about things, even here in our beloved community. Of course we do. We're human. But when we get into committee meetings that go on too long, I'm not saying that any do. When we have the inevitable difficult moment with someone here who we have trouble connecting with, we have to remember that the very fact that we're here in this church shows that we believe there is something that we as a community can do to make this world a better place. And that means working through challenges when things get rough. That's all very well, you see, Jason, but how do we stop ourselves from dreading the terrible possibilities that might occur? How do we stop ourselves from living in fear? After all, I'll be the first to admit that life throws a lot of stuff our way that just doesn't make sense. The answer sounds simple, but I think its implications are really profound. To manage fear, we have to have faith in something. We have to have faith in something. Now, for other churches, that faith often rests in ideas outside this world. But throughout our history as Unitarian Universalists, our faith has mostly rested within this world, albeit with a healthy appreciation for the awesome wonder of the mysterious universe. And when we set down our roots in a strong, optimistic community, a community that believes this world can be changed for the better, and believes that humanity leans toward good, and believes the arc of the universe bends toward justice, then we ground ourselves in something that can keep us strong and steady, even in the greatest storms that we face. In community, we practice finding what is positive about our lives and the world around us, and it becomes easier and easier to see the good when the bad gets the temporary upper hand, instead of waiting around for catastrophe and then finding ourselves immobilized when it finally occurs. But you know, that's easier said than done, I know. I was in danger of being overwhelmed myself just a few years ago. My mother-in-law was terminally ill, and her condition left her unable to walk and with severe dementia. As her situation rapidly deteriorated, we were left trying to care for her, a situation that promised to devastate her finances and ours if the emotional turmoil of the situation didn't get us first. One morning I went over to her house while my brother-in-law headed off to work. I will confess to all of you that I was terrified of the possibility of having to get her out of bed and take her to the bathroom. I kept thinking how mortified just a few short weeks before she would have been for that situation to have occurred. But my brother-in-law assured me that he would only be gone an hour. She's eaten and gone to the bathroom, he said, so she'll just sleep the whole time I'm gone. He was right. She slept peacefully for about 15 minutes. Then she woke up. She was confused, she was angry, and she began to loudly demand to be taken to the bathroom. Nothing I said could persuade her to wait until her son came home. So somehow, with a lot of sweating and straining as she outweighed me by several pounds, I lifted her off the bed and I confess, after a gentle but unexpected detour to the floor, I finally got her into the wheelchair. I took her to the bathroom and got her settled in. Sweat was pouring down my face, and I was standing angled away from her, trying to give her some privacy, but still staying close in case I was needed. I remember standing there, trembling, shaken to my core, right in the middle of one of my own worst fears. I was in my own personal flood. Rain pouring down, thunder crashing, and every Halloween monster you can imagine lurking in the corners of that bathroom. And I'll never forget what happened then. From out of the haze of confusion, her face cleared for a moment, and with the casual tone of someone inviting someone else to join her in her parlor, she gestured toward the wheelchair, which was just a couple of feet from the toilet where she sat, and said, "Have a seat." For that moment, there was no dementia. Just eyes that twinkled like they once had, and the sarcastic tone of someone who fully appreciated the absurdity of the situation. I burst out laughing, and she laughed too, before that veil of confusion dropped over her face again. And it hit me in that moment. Here I had been in one of the scariest situations that I thought could happen. And even in that moment, it was possible to find a moment of sacred connection, of humor with another person, a person who was facing her own profound challenges. That moment of connection reminded me of who I was, the optimistic outlook I had on life, and I knew then that I could get through that situation, even though I didn't know what the future would bring, and I didn't know why, and I still don't know why, that terrible thing had happened to someone I loved. So for everyone who has ever lost a loved one or seen them in pain, we light this next candle in recognition that when we think we are lost in the storm, while we can never fully illuminate why bad things happen, we can look for a light to guide us on our way home. So when things are bleak, we have to find that thing, whatever it is, that connects us back with who we are as optimistic people, and hold on to it. Hold on to it like a life raft, at least until the next thing comes along. But if we haven't been practicing that, if we haven't practiced looking for the good when life is manageable, if we don't have a community like this church to support us, in disasters, those moments of reconnection can just sail by us unnoticed, leaving us drowning in our own personal floodwater instead of moving through it like Mr. Kazumatsu. Every day then, every day, I believe, we need to seek out something to do, big or small, something that reflects our belief that it is worth trying to make this world a better place. It could be participating with the plethora of outreach programs that this church is involved in. It might mean taking time daily for spirit-nourishing silence, prayer, or meditation. Or it could be as simple as even just saying hello to the unhappy-looking clerk at the grocery store. And maybe that inspires her to interact with her family more positively that night, and maybe that means they go out into the world and do better things than they would have done, and so on. Like a pebble thrown into a placid lake, our actions have the possibility of creating ever-widening ripples. And that, my friends, is how we start to change the world. And you know, if that makes me sound like an optimist, so be it. I am one. But what about all the unanswered questions we're left with? Why do storms wreak havoc in one neighborhood and leave another one unscathed? Why does life, no matter how much we try and make sense of it, remain chaotic, unpredictable, wild even? You know, I think that's one of the most wonderful and awful and awesome and frightening and reassuring things about life. It's full of mystery. Each time we learn something more about this vast and glorious universe, we discover even more questions. The space between stars isn't just distance. It's velvety, dark mystery, so great and so unknowable and full of such possibility that it's no wonder it sometimes scares us. But if we can trade our fear for awe, if we can celebrate what we do and do not know, if we can cling to each other amidst the uncertainty, then it will be all right. It will be. So I'd like to light this final candle for starlight in all its infinite majesty, so much greater than this candle, and yet both composed of light, yet so fundamentally different at the same time. In the certainty of this uncertainty, this ever-present mystery, there is comfort. It's no wonder then that my Aunt Evelyn, the woman who didn't believe the sun would rise ever after that terrible storm, and who most of us would think was a lost cause, she changed profoundly over the years. She went through some hard times, but she survived, and she even surprised herself. Now when you ask her why her house is stuffed with all that secondhand china and those thrift store tables and chairs, instead of answering that she's waiting for doomsday, she says, "Well, Sugar Pop, you never know when you're going to have a great big party, and you can always use some extra plates." That's a step in the right direction. Thank you, Aunt Evelyn, for letting me tell you your story. And may we all learn to weather the storms that come our way, and no matter how distant the horizon, may we hold tightly to the hands of our loved ones and turn, always turn, toward the incomprehensible wonder of the sunrise. Amen.